Hello, everyone. Jeffrey Tefertiller back with another Service Management Leadership Podcast. We have a great guest, Joseph DeKonty, Senior Director, Enterprise Service Management, PepsiCo. Joe, how are you today?
Good, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me on. How are you doing today?
I am awesome. All fired up as usual. So you have an interesting role. It's Senior Director of Enterprise Service Management. It's a new role for you, relatively. Everything's relative nowadays. And so what appealed to you? And so I'm open-ending this to you because I really enjoy this topic, this story. So I'll turn it over to you for this.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, it's relatively new in the sense that I've only been at PepsiCo for a little over a month now. And previously I was at Red Hat, technology company, and I was running the IT service management team over there, which really evolved into the enterprise service management kind of framework and practice. And I was helping to steer that ship while I was there, and opportunity presented itself at PepsiCo, and it seemed like a really good one. So I decided to pursue it. And so, yeah, it is a little different though. Enterprise service management at Red Hat, I was inside of IT, trying to work it from that perspective. Now at PepsiCo, I'm actually a part of the global business services area, so living inside of what IT typically calls the business, really being the business owner for enterprise service management. And definitely some pluses to this, being in the business side, running the enterprise service management, because you really get a chance to work with your other stakeholders that historically you're looking at it from a technology service delivery perspective. And so now being in the business side, I get to focus more on, what are the business capabilities that we're enabling? What are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve from a business perspective? Obviously partnering very, very, very closely with IT. And in my world, my IT counterparts are even my business partners, because IT service management becomes one of my business partners in enterprise service management. But yeah, no, it's definitely a unique perspective, but it's one that I think was just kind of a natural evolution when you think about service management. When you think about the associate experience that we're trying to create, knowing that IT delivers services, HR delivers services, facilities deliver services, marketing, procurement. And so I think it just kind of became a natural evolution as companies were thinking about agility, scalability, and really focused on creating real world experiences for associates. There was this kind of inflection point where all of the businesses kind of realized we essentially do the same thing, just from our different functional areas, and how much better of a solution would we deliver if we were thinking about how we could do that together. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity at PepsiCo, and it's in its early stages, but it's gonna be really fun to be able to kind of put my print on it and help guide it in partnership with the great team that we already have.
And so I appreciate this viewpoint, because it's my belief that in the future we'll see more of this, because IT owning enterprise service management seems a little myopic. It seems a little that you won't get the full holistic view. And so if we push in a little bit, your HR business customers, your facilities business customers, marketing business customers, even IT, they all have different needs, right? They all have different outcomes that they're trying to get from, and your group helps facilitate those. Does that seem like it's somewhat correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're actually in these really good conversations right now, because what we're realizing is that when, whether it is HR or whether it is IT, whether it's facilities marketing or any of the other examples that are out there, there are these kind of certain processes that we do regardless of, functionally where they're coming from. And each function tends to have their own language around it. Like, for example, HR talks about what they do in terms of cases. Facilities usually talks about it in terms of work orders. IT, incident, problem. But when you really kind of break down the language of the function and think about the language of the customer, really we're just talking about support and delivering the service or fulfillment of the service. And so that's what's been really unique, is that we've been able to to take the language that is typically functional, typically specific to that area, and start to really break down the walls and talk about, how do we surface this in a way that is more real world consumer experience in the way that we talk to our customer. And the unique part about it is that we also find that there are these other processes that we really all do the same, which is, intake, demand management, capacity management. And so when we sit back and start to really look at running our services end to end, we realize that it's not just, the delivery and support of the services, but it's all these other things that we have to do to run our functional areas. And now the question becomes, can we essentially provide some type of a framework or standard around that, so that way we can create, better agility, we can create consistency across what we're doing. When we start to look at the measures of what we do, from a customer engagement perspective, we're actually looking at those the same way. And so, yeah, it's pretty exciting, and it's really good because I think it takes the pressure off of IT, right? I think one of the things that was really unique when I was at Red Hat is that I was running the development team, I was running the ITSM team. I also had a little bit of the IT operations management team from a CMDB change perspective, configuration. And the hard part that I was running into is I had to balance all of those. And I also had to balance the fact that HR was asking for these things, and that, facilities and all the other teams that we had brought on, to the framework that we had created. And the nice part is that now that I'm kind of enterprise service management underneath the global business services, I get to take more of an agnostic role in this, right? I get to say, okay, well, I do think that there are certain processes that enterprise service management should own and help, define at an enterprise level how those are going to be done across all the other functional areas. Each of the functional areas can still own, their respective spaces, case management, incident problem, things like that. But it takes the burden off of IT to not only have to deliver the technology, manage the demand, manage the prioritization, because now you have a business that is agnostic of all the other departments, really helping to facilitate those conversations. And that's really what ESM is going to be about. It's about being that facilitation, bringing everybody to the table, and helping to create that unified direction, vision, and strategies around how you actually provide the best experiences for your associate.
Right, and that includes everything from metrics and measures, like how do we standardize that? So given your different business constituents, I want to throw some topics out to you, just on like how they differ among them. Because what I have found is if it's an IT-centric view, these are very easy conversations. But if you have different business customers, it becomes a little more difficult. Right. So we think of governance model, right? Because your ESM should look governance-wise similar for your HR to your facilities, because HR needs governance, facilities needs governance. Of course, your IT org and your others do as well. How does that look in your organization, having those different governance models, if you would, now rolled up into one?
Yeah, no, it's what's funny is that most people's governance models are probably pretty similar when you look at that, right? So it doesn't matter if it's HR or facilities, procurement, marketing, even IT, everybody typically has kind of that same triangle look, right? That says, here's who sets the, vision, the direction, the next level down sets the strategy, the bottom level is kind of the execution arm. And that's what's interesting is as we're going through this, we're looking at everybody's kind of governance models and saying, okay, how do we align these together from an enterprise perspective, right? How are we, really empowering the teams to be able to make decisions? It is one of the things that is pretty exciting about the work that we're doing at PepsiCo is PepsiCo really is trying to move towards, an agile model of running the business, and IT adopted that a while ago, and they're leveraging the SAFe model and how they do that. And so we're going to incorporate that, because since IT is still, it's unique in enterprise service management, IT is my technology delivery partner, right? But they're also my business partner, because the ITSM side is my business partner. The IT operations management side is my business partner. The services side of IT is really my business partner, but then the, technology development team is my technology partner that's delivering the solutions that we're looking for from a technology perspective. And so, What is good is that everybody kind of had a governance model already in place. We have a defined delivery model in that we're going to use SAFe. And so now it's a matter of, normalizing across those things and saying, okay, how are we doing this? And the great part is the governance models are still being very structured, very similar. The difference is in that top layer of the governance model, now I'm asking the CIO, right, the CHRO, to come up with strategies together, right, as opposed to coming up with their own IT strategy on how they deliver services, HR to come up with their own strategy, how they deliver their services, right? We're having conversations at an executive level to create alignment there, which makes it easier to create alignment at the next level and makes it easier to create alignment at the next level, because we know one of the biggest challenges every organization has is what are our priorities and what can we do based, how do we meet the demand based on the capacity we have? And when you start to look at that across the functions and not in siloed approaches, you can now say, well, how do we focus on the most important things based on the associate experience that we want to create? Great part is PepsiCo was already thinking that way before I even got here, which is fantastic for me. It's not something that I had to convince them of. It's something that they realized that they needed, which is part of why they're bringing on enterprise service management.
Yeah, and so also it saves money, right? One governance model saves a lot of money, and it gets those expectations, because you're saying players that have to be governed now have one model instead of 15. So let's also talk chargebacks. So now chargebacks are somewhat normalized, right? Because everybody knows what to expect. Escalation, similar. Focus on customer experience, because now we, in this model, so you can jump in on any of these, but now on the customer experience, it should be expected the same across each, not we have higher for IT and lower for marketing or vice versa or any of that, right?
Yeah, and the great part about it, and that's one of the advantages, I think, when you start to think about enterprise, when you think about service management at enterprise level, and you start to actually create that as kind of a business within your organization, is because all those things you listed, you start to be able to run those in a more efficient way, right? So when we think of, to your point, when we think about chargeback, part of the advantages of moving to an enterprise service management model is that you're looking for efficiencies across these shared processes, right? So do we really need this many people? Do we really need this much technology, right? Or can we start to standardize on certain technologies that are enabling these processes and providing solutions to the services teams in a consistent fashion, which ultimately, reduces the cost that goes out to the business. Same thing from the associate experience, right? Now I'm not, one team, when we think about kind of the channel strategy or the engagement layer to the associate, IT is not introducing a real-time chat capability, and HR is saying, well, we don't want to do a real-time chat. Like, we're having those conversations before we actually decide to say, what are the experiences that we want to create for the associate, because we've created that governance structure and we're looking for, what are the right things to be doing at the right time. I think the great part about PepsiCo is it's a very opportunity-rich organization. I was fortunate that Red Hat was also a very opportunity-rich organization. And so the challenge was never around finding things to do. We always had plenty of things to do. The question was, are we working on the right things that add the most value for the organization? And I think that's where a shared enterprise model comes into place, because it really enables those conversations, I think, a little bit differently that typically happen in silos.
Yeah, and it's shared vision, and I don't want to get off on this too much, but you get into SLAs, OLAs. I mean, I'm saying this for our listeners, right? If you're in marketing and the SLA, OLA conversation looks very different, especially I think of you having IT as a customer and as a delivery partner. SLA, OLA looks a little different.
Well, and that's a great example, right? So when we think about, so first off, to me, there's always ultimately you want to get to a place where you're measuring actionable things, right? And, one of the conversations that people talk about pretty often is this, concept of an internal NPS score.
Right.
And I actually, at Red Hat, we were playing around with that idea and we were pursuing that idea, and we actually decided to pivot away from that. And the reason we decided to pivot away from that was because we realized NPS was really, rating you against something else out there. Like would a customer recommend this over something else, right? Well, the reality is inside of an organization, it's not like associates ultimately have a choice. It's not like they get to choose a different 401k plan. It's not like they get to choose, typically a different laptop other than what IT gives them. And so we kind of realized NPS didn't give us actionable things. And so I had a phenomenal team, and I'm going to give all this credit to the team that was doing this. They really asked the question of, well, why don't we track effort score, right? Because that's more of an indicator of something that we can action against. Or why don't we track, employee sentiment score, right? How did it make them feel when they were receiving services? So we actually started looking at those things, which then, as we started with, okay, those are the things we want to look at, it gave us the opportunity to normalize across some of the SLAs, because when you get in the SLAs, a great example is, excuse me, sorry, is that, some organizations, when, if there's an incident that's, so IT is a perfect example, when incidents open, some people stop the incident clock once they've responded to the, employee, and it's sitting in the employee's queue, and the employee might not look at that for a day or two, but we're not tracking that time. But then you might have HR who does, right? HR says, hey, we want to know total open time of a case. And so what this does is it forces us to normalize against that. It says, okay, IT, is that really the right way to measure it? HR, is that really the right way to measure it? And so, because at the end of the day, we want to have actionable things that we can do. And this helps us to have those kind of conversations across the board to start to normalize against, our service performance and how we're doing those things. And so it stems some really good conversations, because now everybody was bringing their kind of requirements to the table, the problems that they were trying to solve, realizing they're all very similar, but how do we start to measure those things in a consistent way so that way we really understand the associate experience?
And I'm with you on the NPS. Here's my view. Here's my illustration for NPS and how it's misapplied in IT. You go to a sit-down restaurant, the waiter, and you get assigned a waiter, right? That waiter, if you gave them an NPS score, how are you going to compare them? You don't really have a choice to switch to groups. You can't go, no, I want to sit in that section with that person. But you can measure, did they do their job well? Did they give you the right effort, the right level of service, the right attitudes? You can measure all that. And so I use that waiter analogy for NPS just to say it's misapplied in IT when there aren't other options. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting, because I think about like my day-to-day. So first off, I know this is the standard way of working for everybody. So everybody's using some type of video conferencing system. And I know for me, like, most recent one that I was using was Zoom. As soon as you hang up off the call with Zoom, what do they pop up for you? A thumbs up and a thumbs down, right? They want to know, how did you feel about this experience, right? They're not asking you to say, would you recommend this? They just genuinely want to know, what was your sentiment? How good was this? How bad was this? And so you're exactly right. I think we need to think about that internally a little bit different. Again, NPS, great measure for external customers where they have choices, but to your point, when they don't have a choice, is that really the right measure to be looking at?
Right. It's like a waiter. The waiter, he or she gets tables dealt. They don't know who's coming in the door, but they have to do a great job.
Right.
And that's how, anyway, that's my analogy or illustration. So now let's dive a little bit nerdier, a little deeper. So how does a business view of the CMDB now look? Because you're a consumer and a driver, a provider of it.
So I'm going to say that I am thankful that I started off my service management career in IT, because it gave me purview to things like CMDB, so configuration management database, right? And if I don't think if I had that experience beforehand, I would have really understand the value that brings to an enterprise. And so I do think that one of the advantages I have in now being in the business and being enterprise service management is that part of my background is in IT and does know a little bit of the technical side. The nice part is now I can work with my IT partner to help them fill the gaps on the CMDB side, thinking about the CMDB from more of a business perspective. So I was fortunate enough that when we did our CMDB project at Red Hat, we actually took a business's approach to the CMDB. So, historically CMDBs are typically built bottom up, right? It starts off with the lowest level of your infrastructure, and then you work up to your applications. You know, the nice part is we realized the value of the CMDB, or one of the big primary values of the CMDB, was to really understand what is the potential business impact, right, when we're looking at our technology assets. And so for me, that became really important because, number one, it let me know what was the quality of the technology services that were ultimately enabling the business services. But number two, when we started to get into cost of services, right, understanding what the total cost of IT was that ultimately impacts the total cost of the business became really important. And that's where the CMDB for me became really important. And it's also really important now as we're having enterprise level conversations around new sets of technology that span multiple areas of the business, right? And so being able to rely on your CMDB, all list of all your assets, being able to, you know, look at your application portfolio, which tied to your CMDB, really becomes beneficial because now you can make more strategic long-term decisions around where you want to invest from a technology perspective to enable your business services, ultimately enabling your business capabilities. And so I'm grateful. I would say the CMDB is a foundational thing. Like it is truly the concrete when you're building your house. And so again, just very fortunate that starting off in IT, I understand the importance of it. I think if I had started off in the business, I wouldn't have understood the importance of the CMDB. So yes, I do think that that is the foundational thing that sets you up for long-term success if you've done that well.
So two things you said that resonate with me. First of all, I'm a top-down CMDB person only because, and here's why, and it's very transparent, because it costs you more to keep it, time, money, resources for granularity going down. So if you start at the bottom, you're going to be super granular, maybe for no reason. And maybe you'll be more granular in some areas and less in others.
Yeah.
In addition, the other thing that resonated with me is when you talk about services. I see services, also top down, as a finesse, as a thing that really takes some skill. And I see too many out there, and we've talked about it in previous podcasts, that think that services is flip on technology and let it go find that. And like in your area where you're incorporating so many areas of the business, there's no way technology would be able to do that on its own. And so anyway, those two were really interesting to me because of the top-down approach. I just see that too frequently. And I mean, the bottom up and not that top-down big picture view. So follow-up question. How has it been having those conversations with your other business partners? So explaining a CMDB to HR people or facilities or whomever, how's that been?
Yeah, I think it depends on who the business customer was. So I can speak, haven't brought this conversation too much up at PepsiCo, but I can speak to past life at Red Hat, and it depends on who the person was. So fortunately, I had some pretty sharp people in the business, and I'll give you an example. There was one person in particular who really understood the value of the CMDB because they understood that if they were making, system changes that ultimately impact the business, how could they become more aware of when those changes were going into effect and what they were doing? And then especially when we started tying it to more strategic conversations around, what is the portfolio of technologies that we have and what is the cost of those? And again, those tie back to the CMDB. But then also them understanding, when we make system changes, like why do things go down? And so it's just, I think we talk about this pretty often. You hear it all the time in the world that every company is now a technology company. Whether they want to be a technology company or not, they're a technology company. And so I do think there's a little bit of the business rolling up their sleeves and understanding a little bit more of how technology works. And this is an example of where, if you have the right people that can translate this business speak to technology speak, it helps them understand, why IT needs to do what IT needs to do to empower the business and to move closer to the business. So I would say it just depends. Some people really got it. I think if you can also translate it in some way or shape or form to the way that they think about it, right? Like facilities does asset management. And so what you're explaining to them is this is a form of asset management. It's a technology asset management. And we have these things that are virtual machines that can live on lots of different hardware. And now we have a, cloud, and hybrid cloud obviously gets much more complicated in trying to explain. to them. But ultimately, it does help them if they have a little bit of an understanding, or at least you can talk to the technical side of IT in a business way to the business. I think that definitely helps.
Right. And I've probably told you this in our previous call, our intro call, is I had a phone call from one of the big cloud providers. There's only a few. And they were like, how do I take the service management principles and apply them to facilities? Because if you're a cloud provider, having release and change and incidents, a great thing versus some other method. So you mentioned your start at Red Hat, going down the service management path. How did that, because your background's not service management, how did you get down that path?
Yeah, no, it's unique. I will say, and it's been fun to talk about this a little bit at PepsiCo as I've been doing meet and greets and introductions. You know, I was very fortunate early in my career. I actually worked for a small logistics company, and the owner of that company definitely had a very entrepreneurial mindset. And so just very, very fortunate that I was able to take those principles and those values that he instilled in me. I mean, he very much, at the time it felt pretty hard, but now I'm very grateful for it because it's kind of like one of those tough love scenarios. And so I think I've always brought a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset to anything that I do, regardless of what company I work for or what, functional area within the company I was in. And so I kind of always bring that to the table. But yeah, no, it wasn't necessarily something I was looking to get into, but there was an opportunity that came up at Red Hat where we were looking to better define our services end to end. I led that program, with a couple of IT leaders as stakeholders. And towards the end of the program, I actually ended up taking over the ServiceNow platform team. Was able to build out an ITSM team as well, started focusing on the ITOM team. And so kind of grew into it. But I think, before I was even in IT, I was more on the business side in general. So I think I brought the business mentality and mindset in that. So I think it just kind of became a very natural fit for me because I just tend to think about those things from that perspective anyways. But again, it was just a great opportunity at Red Hat, a great learning opportunity. And, I think I was fortunate enough to have such a great team to work with that was able to work with my crazy vision for, hey, this is going to be bigger than just IT. This is bigger. This is an enterprise thing, especially because they had already gotten a number of functions onto the platform anyways. Just kind of, which was a little bit of a blessing and a curse at the same time because it wasn't really a direction, wasn't really a strategy, but I didn't have to go sell it because people were already doing it. It was a matter of creating alignment, creating a vision, creating a direction, and then building the strategies together. I think that's the one thing that I learned through this process was, number one, once you've established that unified kind of vision, mission, direction, it's realizing that you need to empower that next level down to build the strategies on how to get there and let them own those strategies and let those strategies be a little fluid, right? Because, new technology comes in. I think that's just a micro version of a macro, thing that we're seeing, right? Where there are industries being disrupted and companies, that had a certain strategy for years and years and years have to change their strategy tomorrow. I mean, COVID did that to everybody, right? I mean, where Uber did that to the taxi industry or the transportation, where Amazon did that to the, retail market, COVID's done that for everybody. And so I'm a big fan of in having leadership set vision direction, letting their teams be at the table as that's happening so they understand why that's the vision, that's the mission, that's the the direction. But then really enabling them to come up with their strategies and figure out, how can we do that? And then looking at those strategies and saying more frequently, right? Like you can't look at that and say, that's our 5-year strategy, or that's our, you can't really look at it and say, is that our 1-year strategy, right? At some point, you got to kind of look. I'm a fan of breaking these down using Agile and looking at things quarterly and saying, are we still doing the right things this quarter? Are we focused on the right things the next quarter? And, having a little bit of an 18-month, runway to look at that stuff, but being, flexible enough to realize what our current strategy is might not be the same strategy, 6-9 months from now.
Think about this. And this one came up in another one of our podcasts was let's say it's February of 2020 and you have a 10-month project and you want to do it waterfall and you have all your ducks in a row and you have your technology and your people and your location all set, and now COVID hits and you have 2 weeks to scramble and maybe less than that, and now you have to alter course because the part that's missing is the needs of your business customer. Those needs have changed. Their roadmaps have changed. So now how do you align what you're doing to them? Does that resonate with you a little bit?
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the part that I'm excited about is learning what that looks like at PepsiCo. PepsiCo being a, different industry than Red Hat, PepsiCo being on the, the beverage side and the other products. I mean, the nice part, PepsiCo's into a lot of different products. They're also diving into sustainability, which I think is really cool, versus a technology company. I think technology companies tend to be pretty fluid, pretty flexible. It's just kind of in the nature of building technology products. But it's pretty exciting to figure out or to see how PepsiCo is trying to apply a lot of those same principles to how they run their business. And really to understand the direction that the customers are going, where the industry is going, but then also, how can they be a little disruptive, right? How can they introduce new things that aren't quite the same that they've been doing for decades? So, but yeah, that's ultimately, again, what we're trying to do internally is realize that even how we run our businesses can get disrupted, a couple months from now. And so how are we thinking about those strategies, right? I mean, a great one for every company is, hey, what is your virtual onboarding, experience look like? Because if you didn't have one before, you have to have one now, whether you wanted to or not. You had to have one now. And that's a great example of where, if a company wasn't thinking about what their, virtual onboarding experience looks like, you've got to focus on it now. And you'll have to focus on it moving forward.
Right. And then talk about variables, info security change, risk assessments, risk management change, business continuity changes, because instead of worrying about those people sitting in the office, now you're worried about 100 people sitting in 100 different parts. And not to get on a business continuity topic, but you have to think Pacific Northwest or down south where the hurricanes came through, Pacific Northwest with fires, you send everybody home, and now you have another event that may displace them from that home. And so it's layered on layered, and business needs change. So you mentioned something it kind of chuckled me a little bit. You went from a software provider, open source, to a soft drink provider, right? And so, among other things, PepsiCo is much bigger than people realize. I mean, at one time they owned the Pizza Huts. It's a big company. But going from software to soft drinks kind of chuckles me. How are those two industries and how you do enterprise service management, how are they different?
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. So I will say, prior to even working at Red Hat in a technology company, I was actually in banking and financial institute. So I went from that to technology, which was a big change, big jump. I'm definitely extremely, fortunate and grateful to have worked for Red Hat. I think, one of the things that I appreciate about Red Hat, number one, it was an open source technology. So the open source principles that you see when it comes to, how they develop their products were infused into the way the company ran. They were infused into the culture of Red Hat. And so I was very fortunate in that definitely, started to reshape my leadership style and reshape the way that I approached working with teams, working with business partners, just because the realization of how taking an open approach to doing these things, taking a transparent approach, still having accountability, still having responsibility, but, really thinking about the way that you run an organization from a culture perspective. I'm forever grateful for Red Hat for that. That said, it's also a bit of a challenge to work in IT for a company that also builds solutions, technology solutions, specifically for IT departments, and which was fun. It was challenging. There were times where, certain people would look at us and be like, what are you doing inside of IT? And IT is trying to say, hey, well, we're not just supporting, the technology side. We're also supporting the HR side. We're also supporting the finance side. And, so it was very interesting. And then again, you had to be very transparent about the decisions that you made. And one of the things that we tried to do was say, hey, can we use open source technology as much as possible, because we want to advocate for that. We think it's a great way, if not the best way, to build, technology solutions. And so it was very unique. It was very challenging, but I think that challenge definitely, again, shaped me, who I am, how I think. And so taking that now over to PepsiCo, I think where that's helped me the most is more on, how we're going to manage through the transformation we want to make as we go down the enterprise service management journey, right? Because Red Hat, from a culture and a technology perspective, you had to be open, you had to, communicate, you had to let people be a part of the conversation, have a seat at the table, do things quickly. You want to fail early, fail often, as opposed to failing way late down the road and realize that there's something really bad that ultimately throws a wrench in your foundation. So I think that's the thing that I'm grateful for, that I get to take to Red Hat to PepsiCo, is those leadership principles that were established in me, using those now at PepsiCo. I will say it is a bit different, right, in that the way PepsiCo obviously makes money is different. And so I think that's the part that it's been a little bit fun and challenging to learn, which is, what are the most important business drivers for the organization, because what those were at Red Hat are definitely different than what they are at PepsiCo. And so that obviously influences what we focus on from an enterprise service management, because we want to focus on the things that we believe add the most value to the business, that ultimately add the most value to our customers who purchase, PepsiCo products. And so I think that's the one thing that is quite a bit different, is figuring out what are those right areas within the organization to focus on, that create the best business outcomes, that ultimately create the best, products and solutions for our customers.
Right, because I see way too frequently IT wanting to do things because it's cool, it's neat, it's new technology. And that's why I mentioned this on our last week's podcast with Kevin, is that in 5 years from now, I don't see a delineation between IT and the business. We're moving in such a direction, and it could be because of IT outsourcing, it could be because of anything, where those are going to be married. And, we're going to have the same goals, strategies, alignment. We're going to share the costs. We're going to share all that sort of thing. And so that thing, Red Hat was interesting because it's IT for IT, and now you are an enterprise business side at PepsiCo. What's your take on that thought?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So if I think about kind of where enterprise service management might even be from 5 years from now, I think it's different, right? So I think when most people think about enterprise service management, the primary focus today is more around the integrated support and delivery of the services, right? So when we think about, again, HR, IT, facilities, finance, marketing, it's about defining and delivering those services in a real-world consumerized way to the associates. But to me, that's actually just one dimension of service management. And I think what you're going to see enterprise service management really evolve into is really the enterprise operating model. It's going to become how the business itself runs. And I think, because of the introduction of, certain technologies, I mean, ServiceNow is a great example of how they're pushing the envelope, trying to be the platform for other platforms. That's what's causing this conversation to happen. But when I think about enterprise service management, I think about all the things that go into that. Number one, what is your service and what is the direction of your service, right? Who consumes it? Then you have to think about how you market your service. Then you have to think about, the cost of your service. How do you deliver your service, right? How are you using data and analytics to make changes to your service? And then how are you doing that in an integrated fashion so that way, so you feel like an Amazon, right? So you don't feel like you have to have 5 or 6 different separate places for people to go to consume these things. And so I think that's really the direction of enterprise service management. I think enterprise service management is looking across the different functions and services of the organization and really empowering them to think with an entrepreneurial mindset, but delivering these cross-functional, capabilities so they don't have to invent them themselves. They don't have to invent how to do catalog management. They don't have to invent, how to do, knowledge management or, support. they have something that they can plug into. So when they think about their specific business capability or their specific service, they really get to focus on the strategy and where do we take that, because they've got all of these kind of supporting activities that are happening that are enabling them to really focus on those things, including things like, you know, total cost of your service, right? Thinking like a CFO for your service. And so I think 5 years from now, that's really going to be the conversation around enterprise service management, is how are we enabling the operating model of the organization, looking through all the different lenses when you think about delivering your service end to end, and then also really tying those into the kind of the global business or the global processes, right? When we think about procure to pay, when we think about, you know, quote to cash, onboarding, right, or hire to retire, the larger one. You know, now you're not only you thinking about the individual delivery of the service or the individual delivery of the business capability, but you're actually thinking about, you know, those things that run across the organization and how do you plug into those, and then how are we making bigger changes on those things. And so I think some companies are already having those conversations today, but I think just like 3 years ago, you know, 3-4 years ago, enterprise service management was kind of a new thing, and it's becoming more prevalent. I think about 5 years from now, people are really going to be thinking about enterprise service management of how do I run my entire enterprise.
Oh yeah, and I think you hit on it with the operating model thought process, because it gets into those topics we talked about earlier, the governance, the chargebacks. But there's one piece in there that I think also helps is the common language, right? We don't have an IT language and you mentioned HR language or a procurement. And it also allows us, you know, I think software asset management, that end-to-end loop where, you know, your short licenses, do you harvest those licenses for somebody else, or do you have that integrated into your procurement to go purchase a license and everybody is so seamless? Or hardware asset management with, you know, just-in-time shipping from your vendors. I mean, it's a operating model, as you put it, and you know, the common language of bringing people together. I also think, just my opinion, that it'll save organizations a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because the governance is redundant, risk assessment or risk management's redundant, and so it's gonna raise that level of the water for all boats, but it's also gonna give them a core competency to judge across the environment or the enterprise.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right on that one, right? I think it creates that scalability and those efficiencies and those, you know, from a cost perspective as well too, but still empowers, you know, people to be innovative, people to be entrepreneurial, people to think about what is the next best way to deliver performance management. You know, what is the best next way to do, you know, procurement, right? What is the best next way to do travel and expense based on real world experiences? And so it gives them the ability with that efficiency, you know, with those efficiencies and scalabilities to reinvest in the innovative side of this, because the better that we can run as an organization, the more time that we get to spend on innovating our products and our services for our customers, and the things that we're doing. So, yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I also agree with you the fact that I think along this journey, to your point, IT gets closer to the business, and there's like definitely this, you know, if one is blue and one is green, all of a sudden you have this very blended color in between. I mean, the whole concept of DevOps or DevSecOps of, you know, having the business, you know, be some type of a product owner, you know, and having them work directly with the development team so that the development team is working on the things that the product owner thinks are going to add the most value as quickly as possible. You know, I think that is part of what's going to either allow companies to accelerate to kind of this world where ESM potentially becomes your operating model, or it's going to hinder it because you as an IT organization haven't really figured out how to get closer to the business, how to speak the language of the business, and really how to focus on, and then, you know, the unique part about IT is that they see all the business, right? Because everybody has to use IT because everybody's using technology to run their business. So I think there's a big opportunity there.
Yes, and so a couple questions to tidy up. So COVID's impacted everything, and we talked about it briefly along this. So it's impacted, I'm sure, Red Hat because of the demand and also changes some of their models. In PepsiCo, I'm sure it's changed because people buy, I'm using a very generic, very weak example, they buy more 2 liters at the grocery store and less soda in a restaurant, right? You know, it's changed. So how's that impacted your enterprise service management?
Yeah, well, it was interesting at Red Hat. It definitely started to help us in some of the conversations because we started having some of those scalability and efficiency conversations, and we realized that there were definitely opportunities there. And I think that's ultimately part of the big sell and reason for the global business services at PepsiCo, and then enterprise service management as a part of that, is really to create, you know, that scalability and those efficiencies. And so, you know, still fairly new, still kind of learning the landscape, kind of learning what everybody's priorities are, what they think the most important thing is. But I do think that that's the value prop of what we're doing from enterprise service management, specifically to things like COVID, right? Where, you know, it did disrupt the way everybody works. And so how do we know that we're working on, you know, the right things? And I think that's also really what COVID has done to a lot of organizations, is highlighted you know, there's a lot of things that we could be working on. We can all be very, very, very busy. You know, I definitely felt busier when I first got, until, you know, you kind of learned the balance. But I think part of what this has done is really, you know, companies have had to say, how do we figure out what are the right things to work on? And I think enterprise service management is one of those areas that helps provide solutions to that question. And how we say, you know, how well are we doing as a company? And where do we need to focus on? Where do we need to prioritize? And so I think that's the one good thing about enterprise that's come out of this very, you know, unique situation that we're in, is that you know, enterprise service management really has become an opportunity to become a solution to some of those questions.
And because with COVID, all the variables have changed. I mean, let's just call it like it is. All the variables have changed. So it allows us to see things through new eyes,
right,
and reprioritize, because our business customers. So last question, I end most podcasts with this question. If you were given a blank check, and I know you're new to your role, so this is, I don't mean it to be a setup like, you know, you were assuming you were at Red Hat and been there for a few years, but you had the resources. Which part of your enterprise service management group or program would you invest in? Because you say, you know, I know that investing in X will always, or usually, return, you know, profit or results.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. For me, I would invest in the team that's most ready, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the way that I would look at it, to say, because part of what you're trying to do with enterprise service management, it's a little bit of a momentum thing, right? Because it's not something that is thought about by every organization everywhere. Not everybody's doing it. And so for me, where I would want to invest is the partners that are ready to go. And so that's the way that I would approach it, because to me, it's once you gain that traction, once you can show that you can do this cross-functionally. So the one that seems to be popping up the most frequently, if you look across the industries, is IT in partnership with HR.
Yep.
Right. But the great part is that, you know, if you're an associate within the organization, every associate deals with HR and every associate deals with IT. And so once you show the value into, you know, functions, departments within the organization, providing a shared experience, right, a shared vision, a shared direction, a shared strategy on how to get there, I think that's what gains the traction. So if I had an open checkbook, the person that, or the group, or the way that I would spend the money is I would spend it on whoever that next business partner that was excited and ready to do it, right, that saw the value and wanted to get, you know, on board with the train and where it was going. That's what I would go after, because it's one of those things that there are so many places you could invest. There's so many different technologies out there. There's a couple of really good technologies that are out there. But I look at it as a people process technology thing, and it's technology you can solve, process, you know, those are defined, we can solve. It's people. And so I would just go after the team that's ready, right? That wants to actually, is excited about it and wants to do it.
That's a great perspective. And here's why, when you're talking about that, I was processing, you know, everybody talks and you're processing it. And I was thinking to myself, that's a great perspective, A. And B, it's because you have somebody that's anxious for your services, and it allows you to work out the bugs and understand how strong is my team, my process, and my technology, because these people are going to be willing to give you feedback to help you now improve for your next business customer.
Absolutely. So great. Yeah, no, that's a great point, great perspective on it, right? Number one, they become a partner with you, right? And to your point, I think, again, wearing my old IT hat, I always loved a business partner that knew directionally we were going in the strategy and wanted to help us get there. And again, Red Hat, you wanted to do things fast, you wanted to do things open, right? They wanted to contribute and, fail early, but then figure out how to fix it, have a retro, do something and solve it. The other part too is they also become, a promoter of your service. So this truly is where maybe an NPS comes in to say, hey, I really think what we're doing at an enterprise service management level really can revolutionize your functional area within the organization, and they become, tons of studies out there on what's the best marketing. And, that's why NPS is so important for organizations, because word of mouth, family member to family member, right? That's the best way to sell your product and to advertise. And so again, that's part of why I would go after the person who's most eager to do it and deliver something really, really good for them. So that way they become a great partner in the journey, but then also a great partner afterwards advocating for you.
Having an advocate. So I'll leave you with this perspective. So I'm a big football fan. And a few guests ago, we had Jim Ryan, CEO of FlexAir. He's a huge Green Bay Packers fan, for those that did not know. So Jim, if you're listening to this, you'll get this. So former general manager of the Packers, a guy named Andrew Brandt, he's does a lot of sports law, was an agent. He had this theory, and I'm adapting it to this, that when you start something new, you have three groups of people. You have the ones that are excited for the change, the ones that are moderate for the change, and the ones that resist change. And he said the ones that everybody tries to go after is that third group that are resisting change. And he's like, no, you should be investing in that first group and having it work down, because pretty soon those that are holding out look like buffoons, because why are they holding out when everybody else is for it? And that made me think from your point of view there, that whenever we're taking over something and we're trying to create change, we need to figure out what's our strong base. Where do we win, and where can we win in the future? So
yeah, that's a great one.
Anyway, I'm a sports guy. For those of you listening, I'm a sports guy.
I'm a big, it definitely made me, think about some other examples of that. But yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I'm a fan of that. Let's partner with people that are excited and actually want to, kind of go conquer that same thing together.
Oh yes, and hopefully you pick up bandwagoners on the way. So
yes.
Joe, thank you for joining us. It's been a great conversation. It's gone by quickly. Any parting thoughts before we let you go?
No, well, I guess I would say, just remember that this is a journey. It's not a sprint, and that it's something that takes time, and it's definitely a people effort in how you're doing this. And so I think focusing on the right people and focusing on those things has been invaluable for me when I think about this. But no, Jeffrey, just want to say thank you. This has been a great conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. And we'll stay connected on LinkedIn, and take care. And we'll be right back with Jeffrey's closing thoughts. Hello, everyone. We're back with some closing thoughts. We first of all, thank Joe for his time. And I know he's a busy guy leading this big effort at PepsiCo. So we thank Joe for taking time to join us. But I want to get into some really fun things. And partly, we at Service Management Leadership can help your organization in this area. So we want to make sure we tell you that off the front end. But there's some interesting aspects to our conversation with Joe. First of all, as service management moves from IT to enterprise, that's a big paradigm shift, big culture shift. And we need to think about why. So you have this IT-centric view, and now it includes HR, facilities, and all these other areas, especially in thinking hospitals and hotels and all these areas where the configuration items, the assets look totally, totally different. So we have this technology that's growing throughout an enterprise. We need to include service management in all those ways. Makes sense, I hope. But let's look at some of the aspects that we talked to Joe about. To have this enterprise view, it helps you with chargebacks, because we want to make sure the business, the consumers are paying for what they're using. Sounds great. We also want to have governance. We want to be able to, whether it's regulatory or another way, to have governance over this technology that's being used throughout the enterprise. We also want to focus on our customer experience, don't we all? I know too many organizations that have an IT-centric view, which ignores, forgoes the customer experience of using your IT services. In the one layer I want to, so also you have escalations, you have service levels, but the one way that this is super, super important, and I want to close on this, is the more you have outsourced, the more your IT organization is splintered from on-prem to cloud to service providers to that whole gambit. The more that is, the more you need an enterprise service management program. Think of it this way. There are many organizations that are outsourcing 50% to all of their IT organization. So who should own service management? Of course, it should be a non-IT entity, because if it was IT, you get into this, and I apologize if it's a US-centric term, but you get where the fox is counting the chickens, and that's not independent governance. And that's what we've seen in our practice, we've seen in many organizations. And so we at Service Management Leadership can help you from the thought and strategy, design, implementation, how to operate and how to govern it, this model. And so reach out to us if we can help you, especially as you're looking at how do we move our service management organization, our program, to an enterprise viewpoint. This is Jeffrey Tefertiller. Once again, we appreciate Joe's appearance on this podcast, and we hope that he just knocks out of the park at PepsiCo. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Let me know if there's something I can do for you, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Have a great, great day.